Give me a moment, fellas. I had to use a different stream than the one scheduled because I scheduled it on my computer and it's nowhere to be found on the phone, and so I could not use it. Unless I wanted to run it off of the computer, which I didn't want to do that for various reasons. So I had to make a brand new stream, which is what you're watching now. And I'm going to get rid of that other stream that was scheduled. So bear with, will you? Just a little bit. Have an icy chemical drink here whilst we talk about bladesmithing. So, I had to do that live. I'm not paying attention. Oh, that was nice. Very nice. So, yeah. Get that right out of the way here at the beginning of the live stream. Very nice. Okay. We have Jesus in the chat, Ratfink, Benjamin Brewer, TBW Blades, White Rhino, Ohio Valley Forge, Dogbone Knives. And as I mentioned, this is the chat. This is the live stream that I was telling everybody about over the last couple days or so, and I had posted, telling people to post your questions for a live stream, and this is it. This is it. So I have some questions that y'all have posted. I made a couple different posts. I did a post on the channel posts, and you guys commented with some questions. And then I did a short video, 1 or 2 short videos, and you posted some on there. So we have some questions to start the conversation off. How's everybody's day? I was working in the shop till about, 6:30 today, I guess. Forging a batch of knives. I got some bigger Damascus chef's knives or kitchen knives, whatever, that I'm working on. Should have those mostly finished. One's mostly finished. And then got some smaller drop point hunters that I was just starting today. Just started forging today. Anyway, so working on always working on a combination of batches, product, and custom orders. Deer Creek Canyon Forge. Dogbone, you're about the 4th person that's asked me in the last couple of weeks, and I'm starting to feel a little sad to say that I'm not going to be there. Not this year. I should probably plan on going next year because I have people ask me every year. Just to show up and see people, I guess. But no, I'm not going to be there this year. It has been, I didn't plan on it whatsoever, and it's been a really interesting spring so far. Pretty busy. Yeah, we haven't done a live stream in a while, but so far this year, we've had hailstorms and animal stuff and dental stuff and stuff. But staying busy overall. We're keeping our head above water in life. So that's always good. I do plan on going back to Blade Show West actually. But I need to pay for my table. I haven't done that yet. I better hurry, otherwise I'm gonna miss out. They're gonna run out of room. So that's the plan. But yeah. So how's everybody doing? Everybody's doing okay, hopefully. We got 15 people, and we can wait for some more people to filter in a little bit before we get into the questions. Feel free, if you didn't post a question in any of the other posts or short video or anything, you can stick it in the chat. Definitely. Don't forget that you can do super chats and help support content here, and that's always appreciated. And of course, those get priority in the chat. But got 15 people, so we might. Well, yeah, and our members too. I would be remiss if I didn't. Benjamin Brewer. We got a couple members in here. Sorry, guys, I didn't mention you. I am off my game. Benjamin Brewer, TBW Blades, both those guys are members. So far, there are only 2 members in our chat, and I appreciate that. Well, hey, thanks, Benjamin. I appreciate that also. Well, with that, let's start with the first question that we're going to jump into here on the channel posts. Start with the I guess the first question here. Well, there's a question here. It says, so Garrett Haley 314, how do you fit pins and tubes for handles? And yes, if you need an oversized hole. And I actually did a short video on that, which I responded to him. But yeah, you have to have an oversized hole for your pins, whether it's a pin or a tube. You have to have a slightly oversized drill bit, and you're looking for like maybe 3 thousandths over, 3 or 4 thousandths over, and that'll give you a nice slip fit. But that's something that I learned in machining back in the day. We would have all these different tools and methods of checking sizes of the machined part to make sure that it was within tolerances for the blueprint. And one of those would be a what you would call a go no go gauge. It would give you a range between acceptable and either too big or too small, right? So as long as the gauge would go however you were working it, with a bore or something like that, as long as it would go in, that you were good. And if it didn't go in the no-go, then you were good. But if it did go with the no-go, there was a problem. Something was too big, too small, whatever. And the point I'm making there is that a 1/4-inch pin doesn't fit into a 1/4-inch hole. That's just something you kind of learn. So there's a range of drill bits, for example, that provide that slip fit and makes assembling a handle much quicker, much easier. You don't have to grind your pin stock, which it's hard to keep it really round if you do that. It's just a lot better. It's $3 or $4 drill bit. So it's a good way to go. Rafik's waiting on his new forge. He's been cold shoeing all week. When I went to horseshoeing school, they taught us hot shoeing, and our our instructor, the guy that ran the school there, is like, if you cold shoe, you're gonna go to hell. Well, fortunately, I had another plan for not going to hell, so I just ended up cold shoeing. But yeah, it's a little harder on everything. Yeah, sure. Assuming everything's good with the audio and everything like that. Haven't heard any complaints, but well, the next question we'll talk about is from Chandler Reeves 6573. He says, "How do you get the blades flat when forging them out without a power hammer?" The basic answer to that is with careful hammer blows, like hammer control. And then, well, second, that's the first thing, and then the second part would be a flattening tool. I think it's called a flatter. But when you're forging, you want to be careful to not put any heavy, big, initially you will frequently do so, even on purpose, put heavy divots or take bites out of the steel, not literally, but like big divots and stuff. And that's one part of moving metal quicker with a hand hammer. But as you approach the end of your forging process, you want to minimize that as much as possible and use more the flat part of your hammer and sort of work your way towards a cleaner forging on that piece. And so you can get really close with that, and you can get a very acceptable surface with just your hand hammer if you're careful, and you, as you practice and learn, you have hammer control, meaning it's not tipped, either this way or that way, because when you do that, that's when you create divots and forge it unevenly. So it's planishing is a term that people use for just hammering things flat and clean. And then secondly, you can use the blacksmithing tool, the flatter, which is not a hammer. It's a tool that you place on the piece that you're forging and then hit it with a hammer. And that flatter, that tool is flat on the bottom, unlike a hammer. A hammer has a slight convex surface to it, which is important. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot greater risk and incidence of divots and edges and stuff in your work, because it's more difficult to hit the hammer completely flat unless you're being very, very attentive to that, which you're not trying to do when you're forging. Anyway, so careful hammer strikes, especially as you get towards the end of your project. And then a flatter is also a handy tool. So assuming your anvil's flat and you've got a flatter, you're smacking it and it's flattening it between the two surfaces. That's the best way to do it by hand that I'm aware of. Not a sponsor. If you cold shoot, you need to be born again. Well, you need to be. Yeah, that's up for debate, I guess. You never know. Chevy Guy says, "I just wanted to say thank you for getting upset with me during the live stream. We were sharpening knives, and I told you I sharpened my knives on a 1x30. I now have graduated and do it on a diamond stone." Well, good, I guess. There you go. Once shoot, always shoot. Right. That's funny. Okay, let's hopefully that answered that question. That's how you get stuff flat without a power hammer. Which, by the way, power hammer is not necessarily like a foolproof method to getting stuff flat, particularly if you're working with like combination dies or different things like that. Like my power hammer, depending on where you use the dies, it's still not. I wouldn't say it's still not completely flat. You kind of have to finesse it a little bit. So it's not necessarily a absolute fix anyway, but all right, so we've got Slucerio, I guess that's how you say this name. That's the question. Retempering / rehardening. I would like to refer to redoing the tempering treatment of the blade since it was not good enough, causing teeth breaking the edge of the blade. How to do it and how. So retempering and rehardening are obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious, but they're two different things. If the problem is that the blade is just too hard still and everything else is good, then you can temper it again at a slightly higher, an appropriately higher temperature than the previous time, and make the steel a little bit softer, a little bit tougher, and that could fix your problem. But if you need to completely reheat treat it, that's a different story. So you can't retemper a knife when it's got a handle on it. I mean, you could, but it's probably going to ruin the handle because you're talking like, usually 350 to 450 Fahrenheit. Usually 350 to 425 Fahrenheit, somewhere in that range, and it's going to wreak havoc on a handle. So if you had to remove the handle and retemper the knife at a little higher temperature and gain some toughness, that's how you would do it. You don't have to do anything else to temper a knife out more, if that makes sense. However, if you've got issues with like other things going on, like maybe there's something wrong with the steel, maybe it's been overheated, maybe the grain structure is not what it should be, and it's those things could be causing issues as well. And if that's the case, then you have to start at the beginning of the heat treat process, and potentially you can fix that. But those are two different questions. So I hope that answers it for you. Hopefully that answers it. TW Blades, one of our faithful members here. In case nobody asked, what is your starting thickness for a general use chef's knife? I've been starting at about 1/8 inch thick. Yeah, I would say it kind of depends on the method of construction. If you're doing a stock removal knife, well, let me back up. 1/8 inch is good. I do a lot that are similar to that thickness. If you're going for something that's got a little more dimension to it, you can start a little bit thicker, and especially in the tang and / ricasso area. They don't really have a ricasso, but you know what I mean, in front of the tang there, or in front of the handle, particularly on a hidden tang knife. You can start out thicker, and that adds a little more dimension to the knife, but then you're gonna have a nice distal taper right away, and then that bevel, that grind. And so, practically speaking, you're not really making a much thicker knife. You're just giving it a little more meat in the tang / ricasso area. And so that would be the only instance where I would consider going much thicker than something like 1/8 of an inch. Anyway, yeah, that's what I would say. So if you're doing a stock removal, that's a good thickness, because you don't have to grind off a whole bunch more material. But if you're forging, then it's going to give you a little more flexibility. You can start with a thicker piece, give that tang a little heavier dimension, and taper it down from there. So hopefully that answers your question. Mule Power Forge, the OG Frenchie. More people coming in. Yeah. Neil Power's watching during a tornado force storm. Yeah, that's the other. We had a tornado warning 2 nights ago. Pretty good storm come through. I didn't see a tornado, but we had the sirens going off and the phone warnings going off and stuff. So we sat in the shelter for about half an hour. Got some rain, wind. Yeah, it's been an active spring. Definitely out of the entire time we've been in Texas. This will be 5 years here just in a couple months. This has been the most active spring as far as storms go. TBW, good deal. All right. Well, let's move on to another question, shall we? Darna Harak. I don't know. I'm not saying that, I'm sure. Anyway, this fella says, how would one go about making Damascus that resembles the rings of a tree? That's a good question. So the inherent issue with forge welded, pattern welded Damascus steel is anytime you forge something, you're deforming it. And so, you can make calculated, movements on a forged piece. Like if I have a pattern that I want to maintain, certain dimensions on, and I transfer it to a blade, I'm gonna have to forge it out this much this way, but you have a longer blade, and so you kind of have to start with that in mind, because you have to forge out things in equal amount in all directions if you're going to maintain the integrity of a particular pattern as much as possible. And so there's things like that to take into consideration, and that would probably be the biggest issue with trying to do rings of a tree if you were trying to keep those, concentric and round and true. So that being said, I think probably the best way to do something like that would be to actually use something like, which, most of us aren't going to have the capability to do anyway, but theoretically speaking here, powder metallurgy Damascus, like Damasteel. That's how they make theirs. It's powder. They have different powders, and they make, do patterns with them and forge weld the whole thing together, and they get very consistent patterns like that. And so that's one way that comes to mind that you could potentially do that. Another way would be if you had some kind of you could get like slices of pipe or some kind of tube, of graduated size. You'd have to find an appropriate material for that. You could use, just a black iron or with steel, mild steel pipe. You could potentially use something like that, but you'd have to have a whole bunch of different sizes all the way down. And you could have like maybe powdered steel with nickel content in between those. That wouldn't work actually, because not powdered steel, not with nickel content, because the mild steel is going to show up light colored. So that could be a potential way to do something like that. But you'd have to have a whole bunch of different pipes that were smaller, so you'd be getting a lot of those. But it might work. And then you just have to be super careful with how you forge it out. The main difficulty with that would be getting all of those to forge weld laterally before you forge it, before you could turn it into a blade. So that could be a challenge. You might not be able to accomplish the lateral forge welding of those rings just with vertical pressure. You can to some degree, because vertical pressure causes things to, squish out and run into each other basically, and create that lateral pressure. But I don't know if it would be adequate. So realistically, you might have to be able to create a canister of sorts that you could forge weld on the sides of your tree rings, and then you'd have to forge it out, and that's where you run into the difficulty. of having that pattern deformed. And so it would be very, very difficult to get a perfectly round tree ring or even just concentric kind of tree ring pattern. Not that it wouldn't look cool, but it would have some level of deformation to it. But anyway, just thinking out loud, that's one way that I might approach that idea and some of the challenges that come to mind with a pattern idea like that. So Chevy Guy says the jelly roll pattern. Yeah, you could do that too. That's, you know, where you've got a strip of steel that's tapered and you roll it up. But again, getting that to roll round and it never, I mean, from what I've seen, it would be hard to get that really round as you roll it up to make it look really clean and concentric. But that might be one of the best ways to try to do that. So I don't know. Neil Power's got destructive winds. The LG Frenchie asks, would you ever make a folding knives? Potentially, yeah. I've thought a lot about it. I just have not taken the time to pursue that yet. Okie dokie. Dan Kazkor, I don't know how to say that. But he's a client, he's a customer, and he asks, any idea when you will be able to do more custom work? Yeah, so the current landscape of custom orders is that I'm still doing them. What I'm doing now, though, is I'm taking a $50 deposit, and in general, I'm not, you know, giving much of a timeline for completion. It's just kind of where I'm at on things right now, you know, doing batches of stuff and working with some, you know, knife stores and stuff like that. And so just doing all of that. I'm still doing custom orders, but they're more of a as I can. And I'm still working them through. Like I mentioned, I'm completing a couple this week, and I just started on some actually. But that's what it looks like right now. So $50 deposit, and you know, we can get you on the list, get you in the books, and it's going to be at minimum a few months, you know, and I'm not really giving hard, fast completion dates. That's where I'm at right now with customs, but you're welcome to reach out and let me know what you're looking for. So that's that. See if I can answer this question. I'm trying to understand the question here. CAE2487 says, I oftentimes grind using a bevel, and from time to time, to get my bevel height equal on both sides, I end up having to change the angle. So one side might be ground at 5 degrees and the other side at 4. Is there a way to prevent this from happening? Or am I missing something that I should be doing before grinding my bevels? The thing that comes to mind immediately is center line. Because theoretically, if you're looking at the cross section of your knife blade before it's ground, even if you're forging in bevels, theoretically what we're talking about is a long rectangle. Like here's the spine of your knife, here's the sides, and here's where the edge is going to be, but it's a rectangle. Even if you forge the bevels in, we're imagining a rectangle, right? So in the middle of the rectangle is the center line on the spine and the edge side. We're not really concerned about the spine as much. what we're talking about is the edge, right? And when you grind your bevels, you want both sides of the blade, whether or not you've previously forged your bevels in, you want both sides of the blade to come in as you remove material and meet, well, not meet, but get closer to the center line at the same rate with the same distance from the center line, right? So you're not going to grind all the way to a 0 angle, but let's say you're going to grind this side. Sorry, I got something in my eye. Yeah. You're going to grind this side to within, say, 10 thousandths of the center line, and you're going to grind this side into within 10 thousandths of the center line, okay? And if you're starting with a true clean rectangle here, cross section, even if it's theoretical, then when you do that and you grind to a specific point on either side of the center line, you should have the same angle on each side, and things should be the same. Obviously, if you're, for example, if you're forging a blade and maybe the forging, you've got some, things that are not quite flat and true, then in practically speaking, they may not always turn out that way exactly. But you can still chart a center line on your blade and grind up to the appropriate distance from that on each side. And that will put you as true as you possibly can be. The easiest way to do this is if you're doing a knife blade, whether stock removal or forged, that is you stock removal, you're typically starting with clean, flat, true stock, and then you can forge a knife too, and you can either surface grind it or just carefully grind it or very carefully forge it, and you've got a thickness there that's either consistent or at least flat. Even if you have distal taper, that makes it more difficult. And you can scribe, assuming your knife is straight, you can scribe down the center of that edge, right? And give yourself those scribe lines. And that's where you can grind to. But the point is that the knife has to be straight. You have to be dealing with a straight, flat, true piece of material. And if it's not, you have to at least be able to envision where that should be theoretically and grind to that. And if you can do that, you should be doing pretty good. So hopefully that answers that question. So the point is if you do all of that, then you shouldn't have one grind that is higher than the other, unless, like, it doesn't need to be. Like if you're starting the grinds from the same spot and you're moving them both in the same amount on each side, then everything should be the same. Hopefully that answers the question. Okie dokie. OG's having trouble with his internet. Meal Power asks, what's the reason for taking a deposit? I don't ask for one with custom orders. Yeah, and that's totally fine too. I used to take a I used to take a 1/3 deposit. And I kind of more when I was doing more custom orders and I had a little faster turnaround. The reason I take a deposit is just simply so people are serious. Because in particularly, this is particularly true. I don't want to make a knife or something that I get it done and then call them up or email them. Oh yeah, sorry, I don't want it anymore, or can't do it anymore. Just a deposit I think helps weed out the people that are going to do that a little bit, and then then because you don't want to have a knife that. So hopefully that answers that. And then I would say that also if I get an order for something that's unusual that I would not typically be able to sell easily, I would probably use a bigger deposit, because the last thing you want to do is spend all this time on building this product for this person, and then they disappear on you. Well, now you're out your time and materials and everything like that when you could have been making something that you could sell. And so you don't want that. And I haven't had that happen, and maybe that's partly why, because I've always taken some form of a deposit. It just kind of helps keep people serious, if they, because it's really, hey, can you build me this, and then you never hear from them again. And you don't want to do that after you've built something. So Baltimore Knife and Sword, howdy. Do I live stream often? To be honest, this is the first live stream in a little while. But still putting content up, so not as much as I used to. That's just a fact, But we're still here. We're still doing stuff. We're still making bladesmithing content. And then on the deposit thing too, meal power, it also kind of depends on the price point of what you're making too. Like if you're making something you're selling for a couple $100 or something like that, that might be a little different too. So it's not a hard and fast rule. That's just how I've done it, and it's worked pretty well so far. All right. OG Frenchie, what would you suggest for a website to sell knives? How did you go about making yours? I use GoDaddy. That's just what I started using, like almost 10 years ago, and I've considered switching to like Square or something like that, which actually in the past I have considered that, but actually I don't know that I would today, because I used them for the Square payment processing company and Squarespace the same thing. I don't know actually, so don't quote me on that. If they are the same affiliated company, then I probably wouldn't switch, because Square kicked me off their platform for selling knives, so I don't use them anymore. So I don't know if they're the same as Squarespace. I really don't know. Anyway, I use GoDaddy. There's other ones out there. Lots of there's multiple different platforms you can use for commerce and to sell product on, and I think I'm paying like $400 or $500 a year now for that platform. It just keeps going up every year like everything else, but I think it's up to something like that now, and that includes your website hosting, your e-commerce platform, your ability to take payments on your website, and then you use whatever third-party payment processor. I'm using Stripe now, and they've been good. So hopefully that answers your question. Stray Wolf Forge, how's it going? Neil Power sold a Mueller buoy. That's cool. To a guy that has a mule. He'll have something to take care of that mule when it won't move, and they're kind of stubborn, I'm joking, of course. Just a joke. One time there were some people that had mules, and did some farrier work for them, and how everybody, you always hear about mules being stubborn. Well, one time I showed up, and typically they were pretty good and docile and everything, but one time I showed up, and one of the mules didn't want to come down from the corral or the pen, and he was just standing there, wouldn't move. And I guess he'd been there for like 10, 15 minutes. And the guy's like, yeah, he's being a mule. And he had just had something in his head, you know. So I go up, just kind of walk slow, and kind of just walk around behind him, you know, not right next to him, but just around behind him, real kind of slow. And it was just enough to get him to be like, hey, what's going on? And he just kind of walked, like whatever he thought was happening, he was forgot about. So funny. Scooter Scrapper posted a question. I am very interested in learning to be a blacksmith. As a novice, though, would you recommend coal, forge, or gas? Well, that's a great question. Kind of depends what your priorities are. Getting set up with a propane forge, it's probably going to be less expensive, and it's also going to be probably a shorter learning curve. I had a coal forge set up a long time ago, and have not had one set up for a long time. But I've actually been thinking about a solid fuel forge for a couple different reasons. One of them being, I do think that some of the traditional methods are kind of cool. But one of the things you really do need to look at too is like if you have an availability for coal or even better coke, or maybe even better still charcoal. And there's a lot of places where it'd be pretty expensive and tough to get. So you really want to look at that too. But anyway, to answer your question, as a novice, so I guess I wouldn't use that as the main reason because you're going to have a little bit more of a learning curve on a solid fuel forge. But there are advantages to it, and it is a neat way to do things. And I don't know that the fuels, if you're using coal or coke and you have it nearby available, I don't know that it's super. I don't think it's probably more expensive, but I don't think it's like astronomically more expensive. So if you're looking to get up and running right away, then gas would be probably the way to go. That's what I can say. Yeah, meal prices. I wouldn't say you should start with coal, even though that's what I use. Yeah, coal, and if you don't have good coal, like if you don't have like bituminous coal or something like that, and if you look at like that anthracite, whatever, however you say it, coal, that's like the worst. Coke is a lot cleaner. The impurities have been burned off of the coal, and so that would be a lot better. But if you're really gonna, and I guess the other thing too is like if you're just starting out, then you want to look at how much money you're putting into something right off the bat that you haven't really tried yet, and so that's something to think about also. One of the things that's one of the things that's really interesting to me for a solid fuel forge is the whole issue of the flux. You put flux on a billet or pieces you're forge welding together of any sort. You put it in your gas forge. It is it's devastating to the forge lining. At some point, it's just eating it away. And the more flux you use, the worse it is. And so you don't have that kind of issue in a solid fuel forge because you don't have a forge lining like that. Like your fire is contained in a bed of fuel, basically. And so you have clinkers and stuff you have to deal with, but you're not worried about destroying the lining of your forge all the time, which I feel like would be kind of cool sometimes. So something to think about there, but something to think about. Deer Creek Canyon Forge just got into making basic blacksmith style ash from leaf spring, assuming it's 5160. For heat treating, I've taken it up to temperature until it's non-magnetic, then immediately quench in oil. Sounds like a good time. It says, would it be better to hold at temp longer before quenching? Probably, yeah. On the 5160. Also, the 5160 has a little bit higher austenitizing temperature than like your 1080 or whatever, because it's a hypoeutectoid steel, meaning it has less carbon than the eutectoid point of like 0.77%. So you need a little bit more heat to make up for the fact that you don't have a lot of as much readily available carbon. So you have to spread that carbon around more. Is a simplistic way of putting it. So your austenitizing temperature on 5160 and 1060 and stuff is like 1525, as opposed to like 1475 for 1080 and a lot of other steels. Well, 5200, whatever. So the main thing you're going to want to watch out for though is overheating. Trying to hold that and have a even heat on your blade, but it can be done. So yeah, I would hold it in there for a little bit more, and then I would go above magnetic, and that's where it's kind of hard. Like how far above magnetic, non-magnetic, when that's what you're using as your point, but you're just going to want to go a little bit hotter than non-magnetic. Sorry, I can't talk. I'm tired. Forging stuff all day. Chevy guy's wife bought him a forge for Christmas. That's cool. Off of Amazon. There's a lot of different forges available, and yeah, if it's got that ceramic blanket insulation, make sure you got it sealed up with a refractory or something, so you're not breathing those fibers. Chris Turn asks, hello, I'm building a single burner propane forge. What is the max temperature you think it could get up to? That's a really tough question to answer, because it has a lot to do with the size of the firebox of the forge, how well the burner is operating, what kind of burner it is, what the capabilities of that are, what kind of insulation do you have on that forge box. All those things come into play when you're asking how hot it's going to get up to. So without knowing all of those details, I can't really answer that, and I wouldn't necessarily be able to answer that very specifically anyway. So sorry, I can't really tell you, but assuming everything is pretty average, you should have no problem getting it hot enough to forge with, but very likely not hot enough to forge weld with. You can, I shouldn't say very likely, because I've forge welded in a single burner forge before, but again, like depending on the burner, the insulation, the size of the firebox, all those things come into play. So yes, you can get a single burner forge up to forge welding temperature. I don't know what the design is of yours though, so hard to say. Ransom. All right, Roseway Forge. What about a ribbon burner? Ribbon burners are cool. We got a ribbon burner forge. They can get really, really hot. Excuse me. So anyway, Mule Power Forge posted a question also on the post. He says, how do you come up with your models / designs? Do you just forge something out and like it, so you make it a model, or is it based off another pre-existing knife, or do you design them by doing hand drawings? Mostly the first, and then somewhat the second, and then lastly the third. Yeah, typically what I'll do is I'll be either forging out a piece, maybe forging out a batch, and then what will come out, yeah, I like that, and so I'll make a pattern or something so I can repeat the design. And then sometimes it becomes a model or whatever. And then other times I'll have a pre-existing design that I'll tweak or add things or whatever. For a long time, for a long time I never really drew knives because I was not that good at it. Sometimes I do now, but usually the first two. Usually the first two. Chris Turn says, gotcha, yeah, rather vague question. Thank you for answering me. It's a 24-inch length, 12-inch radius air tank, insulated by 2 inches of ceramic wool with a refractory lining. The burners off Amazon. If you're using that full 24-inch length, that's going to be way too big for that burner. Not that you're not going to have a hot. What you're going to have is a hot spot in the middle or wherever you put that burner, and then it's going to constantly be trying to heat up that forge, and you're going to probably be able to forge with it okay, but you are going to have a harder time getting it up to the higher temps. Bar Run Forge, how's it going? AJ is L. I'm assuming that's L6. Good steel for a Bowie knife. Yes. Mule Power is an artist who draws everything by hand. Well, good on ya. That I didn't really go that direction myself so much, but you know, maybe I should have. Might have saved me some time. All right. Well, I've got one more question on this list, and then we'll have to hop over to the other spots that people posted questions, and then you guys are gonna have to provide questions if you want to keep on and going. That'll be up to y'all though. All right, so CAE2487 says, how thin should someone grind to before putting the edge angles on? 10, 20, or 30 thousandths, etc. Well, that depends entirely on a variety of different things. So on a typical kitchen knife that I make, for example, I will grind to something like, well, around 10 thousandths. And then on a, EDC type knife, probably around 15. EDC, Skinner, that kind of thing. And then when you get into the chopper range, we're looking at like probably 25 thousandths. So those are just some examples, and all of those thickness to grind to before putting the primary bevel on is also going to be dependent on the steel, how it's heat treated, and what the knife is for. So, the examples I gave you are some ideas of a range, because on a kitchen knife, you can go like, 7 thousandths, 10 thousandths. But once you get up to 15 thousandths, that's kind of too thick for a nice, efficient kitchen knife, typically. But 15 thousandths would be pretty good for your average skinning or EDC knife. So those are just some examples. Thanks, OG. Catch you later. Well, I'm gonna hop over here to this other. I did a short asking people to put down their questions. So let me go over there. Find the questions. Wait, hold on. Duck Rabbit, how's it going? also a member. Appreciate it. Stray Wolf, I think you're the fourth or fifth person now that's asked me. Alas, I shall not be at Blade Show Atlanta this year, but I might need to show up next year with everybody that's been asking me. Bar Run Forge. This is my little hand axe, and you could use it for some carving type applications like spoon carving and stuff for sure, but it's a general purpose hand axe. Pretty handy little feller. I actually have a couple of these on the website right now, as a matter of fact. But what's going on? Did my internet just die? I don't know if you guys can see me right now or not. My feed just kind of, or my computer, my window fell out. Whatever. Anyway, yeah, very handy little axe. We're back, it looks like. Quite effective, actually. And, yeah. I forged these from 1060 steel. And this is hickory. I buy hickory planks and make the handles from scratch as well. So, yeah, pretty fun little tool. Pretty fun. All right. Okay, we're still good. Okay. Duck Rabbit. Wrapped versus punched axe. All the axes that I make are punched. You start with a solid billet, punch the eye, drift it out, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff. The wrapped, the other version is, traditionally been used a lot over history. Nothing wrong with it. I mean, obviously you gotta have your forge welds and everything be good and all that stuff, but I've done the punch die billet style the whole time that I've been making axes. Kevin Lipka, I have an axe making question. Is there such a thing as too hot when punching the eye with a hydraulic press? I don't know. If there is, I haven't found it. I like to be on the hotter side, and we're not talking forge welding heat, really, obviously, but closer to that than the lower temps. So I like to have it a little hotter for a couple of reasons. One, the metal is more plastic. It's more what's the word? It's more plastic. That's a term for the state of a material, right? And so there's less resistance to your punch and everything when you're punching. And therefore you can get the job done, the punch in and out quicker. And even though the material's hotter, the less time in the material, you're going to transfer less heat and have less deformation to your tooling and all of that. And secondly, and especially in the other operations of forging the axe, keeping it on the hotter side, you have a little bit more. And I'm not talking about burning the steel. Okay, like I said, we're not even talking forge welding temps. We're talking in between, but you have more time to complete the operation of the particular step that you're at more efficiently, and so you're not in and out of the forge as much, and it's just easier because it's not resisting the press as much. So too hot, yeah, I mean, you can get steel too hot, obviously, but as long as you're not burnt, like if you're up in forge welding temperatures, you don't need to be that hot. But I haven't personally done that, so that's all I can really say. Kind of all I can say. Ratfin, can't wait for my hatchet from you. Right on. Did you order one? Is that what I'm hearing? Let me just look here. Sorry, getting distracted. Malleable, that's another good word. Yes. The metal is more malleable. Or is there a different hatchet that I'm not remembering? Kevin Lipka, what are your thoughts on using 4144 axes? Yeah, I think it's a fine steel for axes. One of the reasons I use 1060 is because of availability. It's got more carbon in it, so I like that. But it's also partly because it's available. Whereas getting 4140 here would be logistically something different. You would want to load up with the trailer and drive, 2 days east and go to a mill and buy like $10,000 worth of steel at a time, which I'm not really haven't been in a position to do. And so I didn't do that. Seamus says, I have one of your pack hatchets and really love it. Glad I bought it. Awesome, thanks. I enjoy building them. They're just really good, useful tools. And yeah, they're like and that's the other thing too, is like there's a little bit of a difference between bladesmithing and blacksmithing. Bladesmithing is a sub-discipline of blacksmithing, but there's a lot of techniques and things that we never get into as bladesmiths, and the axe making is something that kind of scratches that itch for me. I feel like a real blacksmith, but it's the fundamental tool, right? That yes, you need a knife, but if you're going to go build a cabin in the woods, if you're going to go survive the howling wilderness, you need an axe, right? So anyway, fun stuff. Duck Rabbit does wrapped hatchets or axes because dialing in my forge welds is much easier than beating the crud out of an eye punch. Well, yes, that's okay. So, and I think that's a big reason why, in ages past, the wrapped version was a lot more common, because it was obviously a lot easier to accomplish without heavier machinery. So that's definitely part of it for sure. But having a forging press that we have available to us today, that is the more efficient way, I think, for me anyway. And and then you're not worrying about, and I'm not saying that that's an issue. Forge welding is definitely a skill that an accomplished blacksmith should have. But it just takes that, doing the billet style just takes that out of the equation. Anyway, both are good ways. Hey, Samdal, how's it going? Samdal and Sons Forge. Piano Smith asks, do you have any tips for beginners on how to make Damascus successfully without a hydraulic press or a power hammer? Any tips? Well, I will say that forging Damascus by hand is definitely possible. It's just a lot more work. You're going to want to pay attention to all the same things that you would otherwise, but even more so, and that would be cleanliness and tightness of your billet when assembling it prior to forge welding. And then your forge welding temperatures, you're going to need those to be, you're potentially going to need those to be a little bit higher because you don't have the force of a press or a hammer to make up for a slightly lower, you can forge weld at a little bit lower temperature with that extra force. And when you don't have that, you may need a little higher forge welding temperature. Nothing crazy, but just a little bit more to compensate for that. And then just making sure that you, when you set that forge weld on your billet, you're hammering all surfaces. You know, starting down the center, working up one side, and then all the way down the other side. So everything has got a even pressure. If not all at the same time, it's got even pressure throughout the entire surface of the billet. And then lastly, don't start with anything giant, because you start with a billet like that thick, you're just it's gonna be, unless you have a striker and a energetic young helper or something with a 8-pound sledge, I would start with something a little more manageable if you're doing it by hand. Those are just the tips that I have. Yeah, TBW, don't do huge billets. Yeah, he's got some tips there for you. Yep. Just looking at the chat here. Bar Run, appreciate you showing up. Take care. Let's pull a question from the short that I posted, asking for more questions. I didn't think about a limit on questions, so I guess we're just going to keep going. Jeff Rose asks or says, I heat treat my own knives. I use a 2-burner forge with a K meter. The meter says 1475 degrees, but the O1 steel looks orange-ish yellow before I quench. My question is if it's hotter than 1475 degrees, will it be okay? Well, there's a couple of different issues. How much hotter, number one. And then number two, one of the issues with O1 tool steel is that because of the alloy components in it and the about 0.95-ish% carbon in it, it does want a bit of a soak time to get the proper amount of carbon into solution. And unless you're holding the temperature for somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 minutes-ish, something like that, you very likely are not getting everything that the O1 tool still has to offer. Not that it's going to be a terrible knife, but it's not very well suited to a typical forge quenching, a forge hardening process as 1080 would be. 1080 is the or 1075 or 1084. Those steels, once they get up to temp, they are good to go. You can quench them right then. Not so with O1. So how much hotter? I mean, you don't want to be much hotter because, if you're up to 1500 degrees, maybe even 1525, you're probably okay, But if you're much above that, you don't want that. And I wouldn't want even that. I want to keep it down right around 1475 to 1500. And the reason for that is you don't want to put too much carbon in the solution either. And your higher temperature, if you get too hot, it's going to start blowing up your grain structure. O1's going to be better for that. It's going to hold its grain structure better than like 1080 or 1095. But it's just not ideal. And so how to verify whether your meter is operating properly, or maybe where your knife is in the forge, if it's right next to the sensor, you gotta look at all those different things. but you know, it could be right on. It could be right on. Because trying to gauge what the color looks like, you kind of have to learn that. And depending on the light or the lack of light, that's going to change how it looks. And so, but even if it's right on and you're right at 1475, you're going to want to do a little bit of a soak time with that. So I know that was kind of ambiguous because there's variables that I'm not able to that I don't know, and so that's not super. Hopefully that was somewhat helpful. Ooh, okay. Hopefully that was a little bit helpful, but yeah. Hey Randy, how's it going? Duck rabbit there soaking blades in the forge manually. What an animal. Crazy. Yeah, it can be done. It's not super fun. Turn that forge way down. Keep that blade moving. Samdahl and Sons Forge thinking of making a Damascus axe for a client. Only have a power hammer. I would purchase some axe drifts. Something you should do, Samdahl, is go check out. I might forget the name of the channel. It's a YouTube channel. It really is. It was. I think it's still up. What is that guy's name? Does anybody know who I'm talking about? He has a channel. He has it's Brian or Brandon, not Brandon. He's in California. Or was when he had the channel going. What is the name of that channel? Not Niels. Niels. Check out Niels Ogren too. But that's not who I'm thinking of. Yeah. Sorry guys, this is important. This guy, he's got an interesting story. He actually learned blacksmithing somewhere in Zimbabwe, but he has some good information. You have to kind of pay attention to what he's doing, and then briefly how he explains things, you know, because he doesn't go into great detail on the channel because it just doesn't. But I learned a number of really helpful things. I'm going through my subscription list right now because I'm trying to find this channel, and I don't even know if he's still up, to be honest. Anyway, he runs a 250-pound little giant hammer, and does everything on it, including drifting the billets and punching the billets and drifting the billets and all of that. So it would be great to be able to check it out, but I cannot think of the channel name. Hold on. Brent Bailey. That's who it is. Brent Bailey Forge. Go check out his channel, Brent Bailey Forge. And he's got some useful videos. Brent Bailey Forge. He does hammers and axes, and he actually wrote a book too. A lot of pictures and stuff that I should probably buy that book just because you can never have too many good books and stuff. But yeah, check it out. Brent Bailey Forge. He has a lot of really great information on forging hammers and axes, and you should check him out because everything that I could tell you right now is on there too. So he's already made the videos. You know, and I've made some videos of axe making. You can check those out too if you haven't seen them already. And I talk about what I'm doing. And so, do I have a playlist of axe making videos? I think I used to. I don't think I do. Forging axes, I do. I don't think it's up on my. I have a forging axes playlist, and I talk about a lot about what I do in there too. There's like 13 videos in that, and I kind of have a progression of like, you know, when I first started making them, I was learning, you know, and then my process refined a little bit. I think I'm talking on some of those videos, so those will help you out too. But I found Brent Bailey to be helpful in the beginning, and Nils Algren too is also good. But I don't know if he necessarily explains his processes as much from a teaching standpoint or like helping you to learn standpoint as much as a sort of documentary process. I haven't watched a ton of his videos, so maybe I don't know. Yeah, Timothy Dick, yep. Oh, Tim the blacksmith, he does some. Again, you know, sometimes it's just helpful to see what people are doing, for sure. But then, you know, people have different like levels of how they explain things and like what their goal is when they're explaining it to you. Like, are they trying to teach you about the product, like how they're like sort of the overall aura of the product or ethos of the product, or are they giving you specific like, I'm doing this because of this and this, you know, whatever. And Brent Bailey does some of that was helpful to me. Show, yeah, there you go. I'm falling behind, guys. We got stuff in the chat. I guess I'm going to talk about the stuff in the chat before I go back to this other list. Sorry, I don't know that everybody's question is going to get answered. I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. Don't hate me. I mean, you can, actually. I don't care. Here's a good question. Risen asked, will the sand mine knives you recently made patina differently between the 410 stainless and the 125 CR1? Also, would it have made a difference in appearance if those knives had been placed in etching solution, or were the steels resistant to that process? That's a great question. The answer to the first part is yes, and the second part is also yes. And you can see this. I kept this one out of the batch. This is my EDC because I need to test the product, right? But no, for real. But you can see how it's starting to develop a nice little patina on the carbon steel, the high carbon steel, the 125 CR1 right there. And the 410 stainless is the weld line transition. There's a little bit of coloring too, but most of it's just still bright, as you would expect from a stainless steel. And I've been using this for all kinds of stuff, including little food prep tasks and everything like that. I'm starting to get a nice little patina on there. And yes, if I had put them in etching solution, etchant, then yes, it would have done something for sure. But the reason I didn't is because I give you guys the opportunity to develop your own patina on this here. So I think that's kind of cool. I have a huge latency apparently in my. Oh, I put myself back to the. How lame is that? Somehow or another, I rewound myself. So I was waiting to see myself holding the knife up in the camera, and it just wasn't happening, guys. It was not happening. Anyway, I think you can see the patina on there. I couldn't see it. because I was watching like 5 minutes ago. Don't know how that happened. Anyway, yes. Hopefully that answers that question. Good grief. You have to be settled 2% rule. You got to be at least 2% smarter than whatever you're trying to operate. Struggle is real sometimes, you know. All right, yeah, I think we talked about the whole axe and stuff thing. Sandal has a 100-pound little giant. Well, I'm slightly jealous. Are we all caught up? Is the chat all caught up? We were talking about Brent Bailey. Yes. I think we got to that point, right? Everybody knows that. I'm a little confused now. I don't know. I don't know if the chat's all caught up or not. Had a couple of weird internet things tonight. Blame it on the weather. But yes, the sand knives the batch that I recently made, you get some patina on the carbon steel. See, I've got latency on my own monitor here. It could be the bandwidth usage in the house though too. You never know. Mule Power had you had a question back here. That's right. Yeah, this playback or this trying to watch this live has had a couple of issues. Anyway, moving on, pressing forward. Mule Power. Obviously, when you do actual tests, there is some. Let me try that again. Obviously, when you do actual tests, there is, but will someone notice a difference between 1084 and 80CRV2 when using the knife? I don't know. Probably, and partly because I would be more comfortable heat treating 80CRV2 significantly harder than 1084. Also, especially if you're heat treating in a forge, it's true that 1084 is going to. You're going to want a little bit of a hold time for the 80CRV2. But what I'm trying to say is that 80CRV2 is really great at keeping that grain size small. Okay, so having small grain size and keenness of edge, it's potentially you could notice that too, depending on how careful and how skilled you are in the forging process and or the heat treating process with your 1084. But still, assuming those things are all equal, 80CRV2 is going to be tougher, and I would be more comfortable heat treating that a little bit harder than 1084. And so if for nothing else, that would be the difference in a little bit more edge retention. So to answer your question, it depends, but potentially yes. That's my take on it. But maybe I don't know. All right, Ransom. Appreciate you hanging out. What I missed the first part? Well, it's like 40 million questions back. That's why I can't. I don't know, man. I think I might have really missed it. Might have to post it again. I'm not seeing their part here. Might have to post it again. Peace, Ransom. Later. Oh, I need to hydrate a little. My My muscle's trying to cramp up on me when I bend my leg. Well, Legendary Beats Prod .4843 asks, what are your thoughts on Vivor? It's a Chinese company. Yep. That just came into the metalworking game and is making metalworking extremely affordable. How do you feel about their quality? Have you ever owned Vivor tools? The only thing I've got from Vivor is the vacuum pot and the vacuum pump. And it's not something I've used. So it still works fine. But, I haven't used anything from them that I, could potentially have worn out or broken or whatever. So I can't really give a super great input on that. But I think everybody knows that you're going to be able to get something from a company like Vivor. Well, at least you could before the tariff issue. I don't know what it's like now. But you get something from them, and it's going to work okay, at least. And you can, but if you want really good quality, you're gonna have to spend a little more money. So it really just kind of depends on what is your priority at the moment. And for somebody, if somebody's just trying to get into bladesmithing or blacksmithing, yeah, I don't think anybody would recommend that you go out and buy, even if you could afford it, go buy top of the line everything and get all kitted out and everything, because if you never really spend much time doing a particular activity or hobby, you may or may not want to continue. So then you're stuck. Well, you can sell it, but you're going to have all this money tied up in equipment and stuff. So there's nothing wrong with, getting some stuff on the cheap that will work. And if you're really into it and you want to keep doing it after a while, then, invest some money in, higher quality stuff. Yeah, I don't know. So that's kind of my take on it. Yeah, I think I've had some hiccups in my. I'm watching the live here and in my chat and everything, and I've had a couple hiccups. So yeah, I missed part 1. I think I don't know where it's at, anyways. But anyway, Meal Power Part 1. When a blade is heat treated perfectly, let's say 1084, 52, 1, is there a noticeable difference in the field performance between the steels? Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Certainly, you're going to have better. The ones are going to have the best edge retention, and again, assuming everything is heat treated properly to the best of its potential, so on and so forth. But the ones that are going to have the best edge retention out of those is going to be the 52-100 and the 01, and that's because they have the metallurgy that allows for that. So yes, I would say there's going to be a noticeable difference, especially between the two ranges. Like I would put 80 CRV2 in the middle, and then like 1084 would be at the lower end, and then 52-100 probably at the top, and then 80 CRV 01 right below 52-100. But those are going to be pretty. I would say those are going to be probably neck and neck, honestly. But so between 1084 and 01 or 52-100, yeah, there's going to be a noticeable difference. Randy asks, have you ever made a knife from S7? No, I have not. It would be an extremely tough knife, though. Could double as a crowbar. Maybe not the greatest edge retention, though. Well, let's see. We've got JD Cole 2112 asks, can you go into a detailed process about how you get your handle fit up of the tang and handles clean without voids, especially how to do it with the loveless bolts? I want a professional looking glue up, but always seem to get voids. I'm assuming, yeah, so it's going to be a full tang, obviously. The voids, well, the short answer is to get everything flat. If you get everything flat, everything's going to match up. And that can be a little more difficult if you're doing a tapered tang, but still it's flat. So if your handle scales are flat and your tang is flat and you put epoxy in between the two, it's going to actually not have very much epoxy left in there once everything's tightened or snugged down. But if they're flat, they're going to go together flat. That's simply put, that's all there is to it. So the hard part, or the challenge, is to get everything flat. And what I do with my handle scales is even when I buy pre-made handle scales that are like ready to drill and cut out and put on the knife, they're just blocks of wood that are thin blocks of wood, right? Even when I buy those, I still flatten them. And I may even on those start on the belt grinder with the flat platen, but then I will go to my marble slab, which is a leather tooling slab. It's not a surface plate, but it's still plenty flat enough for this application. Put your 80 grit sandpaper on there and sand your handle scales tang side flat, both of them. And on rough handle material where I'm cutting stuff out of like a chunk of wood or something, then you're going to do a lot of that pre-stuff on the belt grinder, but I still finish up on the plate with the sandpaper and get those flat. And the way you know that they're flat is when you look at it, you'll be able to see if there's a consistent scratch pattern across the entire surface of that handle scale. You'll be able to see if there's any voids there. And if there is, you keep sanding. Very simple. That's the easy part. The harder part would be the tang. If you're doing stock removal knives, that's also easy, to be frank. Because if you're starting with a clean, flat piece of steel, as long as you don't, mar it up and stuff, you're going to have a clean, flat piece of steel, and then you put everything together. If you're forging and you're forging stuff out, you may have to do a little more work to get that flattened after the forging process, but it's still the same. Still the same priorities. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So we have Ratfink is a member now. That's awesome. Thank you, sir. Duck Rabbit's been missing out on his free super chats for a year. I guess that's how I would interpret that. Yukon. What is going on, Yukon? Samdal and Sons. Let's read your comment here. Why does my screen keep putting me back like 5 minutes? What is going on? Rudy, how's it going? We are talking about bladesmithing. So I'm trying to read this comment here. Why forging stainless steel? Why is the ABS has a statement there? Their welcome packet that says that stainless steel can't be reliably and consistently forged. Well, my opinion on that, Sandball, is that it's well, okay. Two things. Maybe. I mean, in the past, most people don't forge stainless steel, and there was like a couple of guys that did and have been for a long time, and I think Lauren Thomas talks about him in his book, the story of knife steel. If you get, that's one of his. I think that's his latest book, and he talks about a bunch of different bladesmiths and knife makers, and there's at least one guy in there. I think his name was like Sean McWilliams or something like that. Maybe not. Anyway, there's a guy in there that forges stainless steel and has for a long time, and he claims that it improves it and helps it, et cetera, et cetera. And there's some reason behind that, potentially like breaking down larger carbides and things like that. So it's not without merit. But the ABS is an organization that's started and grounded in traditional bladesmithing techniques. Then that's their stated goal, is to try to preserve traditional bladesmithing. And stainless steel, of course, is post what we would consider traditional bladesmithing. So traditional bladesmithing, it's all pre 1900s, right? And stainless steels or high alloy steels started coming out right before the turn of the century, I think. And so that's their thing. They're trying to preserve. Sorry, my screen dropped out again. Frustrating. That's their main goal. That's the number one thing, I think. And then secondly, the second thing would be people just weren't forging stainless steels, and so I don't know that people really realized it could be done. But it's also it's hard to forge stainless steel, so nobody really wants to sit there and do that as much as they want to hammer on a piece of 1080. Big difference. So there's probably that. And then finally, the thing I would say is that the thing that the ABS tests for with your performance test on your knife when you go to test for journeyman and also master level, the performance test that they have there is designed to gauge specific things. One of those being, I don't have it here in front of me, but some of them would be the heat treat quality of the blade, the edge geometry, and then part of the heat treating thing is whether or not you know how to differentially heat treat a blade. And due to the nature of stainless steel, you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to do it the same way, that's for sure. There's probably ways to do that test with the stainless steels. But when you go to do the 90-degree bend, that's testing whether you know how to differentially heat treat a blade so that the edge is hard and has the edge holding capabilities, and that the spine is softer and allows the knife to bend without breaking. That's what that's one of the things they test for. And you're not going to be able to do that easily with stainless steel. I'm sure there's ways to probably figure it out, but those are just some of the reasons why I think they probably don't. Probably that's why their stance is on that. Hopefully that made sense. Did that make sense? I don't know. Pop's knife supply new steel. Yeah, I heard about it. I haven't really looked into it much. I can't even remember what it is now, but I remember that they came out with something. I'd have to go back and look at it again. I'm drawing a blank on what it is exactly. Duck Rabbit. Yeah, sorry, man. You haven't been able to use your super chats. My fault. My bad. Yukon is doing standard professional redneck stuff. Yeah. All right. Well, do we have any other questions that people have posted? I think we did pretty much get on. Somebody did Bass Spy. Have you ever made a sword? Yes, I've made a couple. I've not made one in a long time. Maybe I will someday. I don't know. We'll see. I think there might be one more question that somebody put up that I have not answered, aside from the chat that you guys are talking. No question left behind. Well, yeah, Benjamin Brewer posted, I'm sure you've been asked a million times, but what is your reasoning behind not putting a sharpening choil on your knives knives. I hear people talk about them, and some knives have them and some do not. In general, I don't like sharpening choils for a couple of reasons. One, and this is particularly on a small knife where you're using every bit of the edge, you're going to lose some of the cutting edge, and that might sound kind of petty, like you're not hardly losing anything. Well, true, you're not losing much, but you are losing some. But then right along with that, if you're trying to, let's say you're trying to cut something or whittle something, and it's easy to catch your workpiece in that choil before you can engage the cutting edge. Are these huge issues? I wouldn't say they're huge issues, but these are all things that I've observed. Okay, so you lose a little bit, you can catch that before you actually engage the cutting edge. And then finally, I just don't think they're that necessary, frankly. It might make sharpening a little bit easier, but when I sharpen my knives, for example, you're getting that plunge line along the edge of your stone, and as this knife is sharpened and used, what's going to happen eventually, obviously, is that the edge is going to drop down, and I'm going to end up with sort of a little nub of a guard right here on the ricasso, right? But I'm fully capable. It's very simple to sharpen. It's because the issue is that you're going to get a recurve in there, right? Well, that only happens if you don't sharpen equally down, right? You can do that. You just have to be careful and pay attention to getting that plunge line along the edge of your stone and hone or abrade away the material evenly along here. It's really just due to sloppy or uninformed sharpening that creates that recurve in there when you don't have a plunge line. Okay, or when you don't have a sharpening choil. Does that make sense? So a little bit more care and discipline in the sharpening, and that's not an issue. So what happens when you end up with this sort of little guard thing as your edge goes down? Well, you can either leave it and sort of have a little measuring device of how long you've had the knife and how much you've used it, or it's not much of a problem to just grind and then polish this down to match the general width of the blade, which you'd want to take that into consideration because you do have a guard here, so to speak, so you wouldn't want to do that too much necessarily, but that's not going to affect the use of the knife much at all, to have this edge just slowly work its way down and to have this ricasso stay where it's at. And again, mindful and effective sharpening, keep that edge profile the same as it recedes over a long length of time in use. Oh, all right. Getting a little tired. Stumbling over my words. Tensa. Is it true nifs can still be made by human hands? Well, have nifs ever been made by human hands? Like, I don't know about you, but when I have stuff in the forge, I always use tongs because it's just so hot. When I try to grab it with my hands, like, I would lose all my skin and stuff. So I don't know if nifs have ever been made by human hands necessarily. All right, you bet, Benjamin. U.S. steel staying in U.S. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Are you talking about like the recent? The actual company U.S. Steel. I'm not sure if that's what you mean specifically, but as I understand it, one of the problems is that, and this may or may not be true, you may or may not agree, I don't know, just from what I've heard, one of the problems is that China was able to dump a lot of really cheap steel, as well as other things, into the market, making it extremely difficult for US companies to compete. And then when they go bankrupt, they can be purchased for pennies on the dollar by foreign companies. And that little scenario is, from what I understand, which is not a lot, how we have lost American manufacturing in different cases and stuff. So, what to do about all that? You know, there's different theories, and some of it is being worked on by people, but I want to have materials manufactured from a reliable source, and excuse me. One of the things that people like about ADCRV2 is where it's manufactured, which is Germany, and it's very clean and consistent steel, or very consistent steel. And so I actually talking to Jason Knight about this at Blade Show, Texas, a couple months ago, and that's what he uses almost exclusively, I guess. And it's not made in China, it's not made in India or wherever else it could be made. It's made in Germany, and you know where it comes from, and that, frankly, that's one of the things I also like about the 26C3 and the 125CR1 is that you have specific manufacturers from specific places, and you know who's making it. Some steels, and 52100 is one of those steels that has a broader range of manufacture, which can be good because you're going to have availability. You're not going to have that issue, probably, but you can have other places making it, and it might be harder to source it from a super reliable or specific manufacturer. I feel like I'm rambling now, but my point is that if we can keep stuff in the U.S., then yeah, I'm for that. Well, Jackrabbit, yeah, these days there's a lot of stuff that's overseas, or just in Mexico and things like that. Back in the day, though, it was all onshore pretty much, and so, and I know some people are trying to bring that back and stuff. But yeah, like for example, the steel that I use for the axes, it's made in Seguin, Texas. I'm sure I'm not saying that right, but just it's down in the Tri-Cities region there, like north of Houston or something, and it's manufactured in Texas here, so that's cool, and I mean, if you're concerned about, and there's always potential for stuff to go sideways, and I know there's people that are thinking about it, and not having the capability to produce some of our own stuff, that could be an issue, not just for making knives, but for other things that are much bigger or whatever. If that makes sense. Okay, guys, throwing some questions here. We might be tapering off a little bit here, or don't. You don't have to. We don't have to keep going. I think we got everybody's question. The no question left behind initiative, I believe it was 99.5% successful, and the only questions I didn't answer was the ones I didn't know about or something. I don't know. No, I think I got them all. Is my chat still working? I've had things just like the signal cut out like 2 or 3 times on this stream, so now I'm like a little jumpy. Like I'm not sure if we're still good. You know what I'm saying? Just never know. Oh, they're talking about manufacturing in America. Yeah, it's been that way. I think it's been that way for a while, and I think there's some initiatives to try to reverse that. That's my understanding, to whatever extent that happens or is, but yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's been that way for, well, I think especially starting probably 30 years ago, something like that. Well, fellas, I appreciate everybody hanging out. If you got questions or something or anything, just throw them up there. I think this is I think we're gonna wind this thing down. I've been streaming for almost 2 hours. Not too shabby. Yeah, and Duck Rabbit. Yeah, it kind of depends on what what we're talking about too. Like a lot of like personal or household type items, or if we can get those from a craftsman or something, that's cool. And then there's other things like a vehicle or medical equipment or machinery, things like this, that isn't going to come from a bespoke or custom setting on any practical level. So yeah, so another thing, so who on here right now is thanks Sam Don Sons, appreciate it. Who on here right now has been or is on Whatnot, the platform, the streaming / shopping / product sales platform? I know a couple of you have been on there. So I got on there recently, just like a couple days ago, and I don't know how much I'm going to actually use it. I'm going to try to use it a little bit, but it's kind of an interesting platform. But you get on there and you do a live stream and you sell product, and people purchase through the Whatnot app or site. And so it's kind of like a cross between what we're doing right here, YouTube live stream and an eBay auction or sales or whatever. Interesting. So I got on there. So if you are on Whatnot, go follow us, Fire Creek Forge, and it's kind of got like almost kind of like a social media component to it because you follow people and whatever. But thought I'd throw that out there. Yeah, and here's the thing. I don't know how much time I'm going to dedicate to it because it kind of looks like you need to stream fairly regularly, kind of build up a presence on the platform. But I've watched, oh nice, Rafting Spot, some stuff from Ridge Runner, Jason, on Whatnot. So right on, man. Appreciate that. So that's the axe you were talking about, right on. Anyway, what I was saying, as with any platform, you have to put some time and effort into it for it to work. But kind of what I'm seeing, and I don't know how much I'm going to do on there because I've spent about the last decade building up to where I'm at now, and we're continuing forward. But I've got other stuff that I've spent a lot of time to build up, so I don't necessarily. I'm going to take all my time and stick it into this new platform. But for those of you that are still doing that, what I'm kind of seeing on Whatnot is I feel like it's kind of what I saw on Etsy about 10, 12 years ago. And 10, 12 years ago, Etsy was a good, pretty nice platform. It was big enough that you got some good exposure. And actually, I did see a question earlier. Somebody was asking about how to sell knives that they have. So here we go. This is pretty much an answer to your question. This is right up that vein. Anyway, 10, 12, 15 years ago, Etsy was kind of like at a sweet spot. It was big enough that you got good exposure. You had a lot of people on there buying stuff. It was still just handmade stuff. And they treated you pretty good, okay? I cannot say any of those things for it today. I still have a presence on there, but I have like one listing, and I don't try to sell anything on there. I still sell like something like once a year on there. But their fees have gone up so much. It's full of just Chinese made stuff, whatever, foreign made stuff, not handmade stuff. There's that on there too, but you're competing with all this other junk. They charge, like I said, the fees they charge you for advertising. Anyway, I wouldn't recommend Etsy to anybody anymore unless you're on there and established and it's working for you. Because I know there's people that are, and that's great. But if you're looking for a new platform, I think what I see on Whatnot, it's a different style of platform. But what I'm seeing there is like, this kind of looks like what Etsy felt like 10, 12 years ago. So if you're into it, if you're up for it, you might try out Whatnot, because there's knives that I have not seen, especially you guys in the chat and in the stream right here. You guys are all handmade custom knife makers, whether or not you're trying to do it full time or not. There's not much of that on Whatnot. From what it could be an opportunity. And I could be totally wrong, but it just seems like it might be. It is kind of the next thing, I think, or in that vein, because I think like TikTok has shopping and stuff too. I'm not on TikTok, but it has a similar type deal. But anyway, Whatnot, it's knife friendly. They have a category for knives. They are not, blue-haired vegans like Etsy has become. So you might try it out. Yeah, just to answer your question there, Duck Rabbit. Yeah, no, they're totally okay with knives. So let me back up here a little bit. Neil Power Forge got another question. You're going out in the bush for a while. You can take only one knife. Which one are you taking? Why you gotta be like that? Oh, I can only take one knife. Well, you didn't say I couldn't take an axe and a saw. That's your bad. So I'm taking my axe or hatchet, probably my pack axe and a saw, and then the knife, probably a version similar to the one that I built for the video where I reviewed the Puukko from Finland, the production Puukko from Finland, and I built one alongside it and went out and used them. Probably something like that. Only I would probably go with a little thinner grind. So something similar to a Kephart-ish / bushcraft sort of knife. 4-inch blade, maybe 4.5. That's what I would take. Thanks, Samdall. Appreciate it. Samdall and Sons. Deer Creek Canyon Forge. My wife sells antiques on whatnot almost every week in great platform. She says, yeah, from what I've seen, like I said, I feel like it's at that sweet spot. And I'm not necessarily going to spend a lot of time on it because I've spent a lot of time building up other stuff and everything. But it could be an opportunity. It's worth checking out. Okay, just a knife. Take other tools, but the knife, what will you take if you could take one? Yeah, it would be something like that, or maybe even something a little more EDC-able. Like if I had my axe and saw, I could even take this out. This probably wouldn't be my first choice, but I would be okay with this if I had my axe and saw too. There would be a kind of a range. Yukon says, how do I build a dwarf battle axe? I'm basically tall Gimli, very effective at short distances. Natural sprinters, right? So I need a short distance thumper. Well, in your line of work, I'm sure it would be very simple for you to plasma or just burn out a piece of AR500 plate of the desired, profile. Grind a nice thick edge on each side, and then you're going to need a handle. Well, I would just, again, in your line of work, get some Schedule 40 pipe, slit it, slide it up onto the thing, and run a bead on each of the 4 deals there, and you've got yourself a thumper. The only thing you might want to add is some gription to the handle. You can do that with some skateboard tape or something like that, or if you want to put some weld dots on it. Yeah, it would be wouldn't be a lot of shock absorption there. Let me just say that. But hey, you didn't mention that, so. Duck Rabbit, another year on Dylan. Yeah, okay, yeah, you let me know in another year. Hey, maybe I'll even do a live stream twice this year. That's funny. See, now I have no. Where did I go? I disappeared. Silly. All right, guys. That's yeah, Yukon. You should. I mean, I don't know if you want to. You should do a build on your channel. Just that's how I would do it if I were you, and then just go like smash cinder blocks and cars and things. Just a thought. Just a thought. Live streaming is, yeah, it's just, man, it just takes time. Everything takes time. And frankly, it boils down to the fact that, for me, it boils down to the simple basics of what's paying the bills. And, several years ago, YouTube was a significant, and I've said this before, YouTube was a significant aspect of my business. And, things have shifted. And so now selling knives, selling product, that is 95, 99, I don't know, %. So see you later, Randy. So that's where the time and effort goes. It just does. That's just the way it is. I'm not dropping off of YouTube. We're still going. We're still making content. Just not as much as we used to, but we got the long game going, I guess. I don't know. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate each and every one of you hanging out. This is your last chance to get in some kind of a question or something. I don't know. Question, criticism, crying, weeping, and gnashing of teeth. I don't care. Whatever. Theories of everything. New month's resolutions. Who knows? Duck Rabbit got some live streams going and got some people on there. Yeah. Hey, if it works for you, man. Right on. Right on. Yeah, and that's the thing too. When you're building something up too, like you gotta put in the time and not necessarily see a lot of return on investment right away. And I'm at a point now where I have to kind of have to feel like I can see a fairly quick turnaround on ROI. Otherwise, I'm gonna go put my time into something that I've got better confidence that's gonna pay the bills. Within this whole business. It's just the reality of it. Weird question. What do you think of other makers' work? Well, it really depends on the specifics, right? Some stuff I see, I see a lot of where it can be improved. Some stuff I look at and I'm like, oh wow, that's wish I could do that, kind of a thing. It's kind of hard to say. Do I see lots of good work? Honestly, I don't spend a lot of time looking at other people's stuff. And yeah, there is a lot of good work out there, but it's also kind of hard to gauge it too, because like you look at a particular knife and it might be done really nice. Maybe it's really a really nice piece, but there's typically going to be something where you're like, well, if I built that, I would have done this differently. These lines would have been a little different. I wouldn't have put that, whatever, put that on there, that kind of thing. And so it's in some sense, unless we're talking about just poor fit and finish and shoddy workmanship or careless designs or whatever, which again, I want to be careful here, because when you're learning, like I look at my stuff 10 years ago and it's it's kind of embarrassing, right? And but we're all learning, we're all on a continuum here. So but aside from glaring things, it's kind of comparing apples and oranges, because everybody is going to have a little bit different take on how to build the same kind of thing, and that's good. So yeah, I want to, you want to see good fit and finish, you want to see good designs, you want to see just kind of clean builds, and some of the simplest stuff, like it's really interesting, like fitting guards and stuff. Like what we're talking about is just like a slot and basic lines, right? Nothing really super complicated, but the different techniques and stuff that go into making that all come together, that's where the magic happens, and that's where all the work and time goes into. And it's a process. So I don't I don't ever want to, I don't criticize people for being on a learning continuum. But I guess there is times when you can look at some people's stuff and you happen to know that they're capable of, they're capable of better. But then you have to ask the question, well, if this was kind of below or sub part of what they could do, it's like, well, okay, well, what was the circumstances surrounding that? What were they building? Were they trying to build? Were they just kind of letting it slide, or were they building a specific lower dollar item, or were they foregoing a particular fit and finish aspect on purpose? Could there be a reason for that? I don't know. Well, Meal Power, the good thing about that then is if you're willing to do really clean, tight work and you're in the same price range as those guys, then that's good for you, right? It can only be good for you long term. And then if your price continues to go up because it's warranted, it's merited, then we're good. Everything's good. And it's funny because you get into that, you talk about that. This is a whole nother subject, but you look at talking about the ABS, for example. You look at the guys that started the ABS, like Bill Moran, and I actually can't think of the other guys' names. Those guys were really instrumental in helping resurrect the whole bladesmithing scene and custom knife making scene. There was other guys doing some of it before them and at that time, but not a lot. And they started this thing called the American Bladesmith Society, and since then, back was that like 1970 something, I think. It's ballooned exponentially. But you look at the stuff they made back then, which would be considered like really high-end custom stuff, and you compare it to the high-end custom stuff that guys are routinely turning out today, and there's really no comparison. And so I would say that along with that, the expectation for the journeyman and mastersmith ratings have gone up, not according to not by like decree of the ABS, but just the bladesmithing community has progressed, in the last 3 or 4 decades to that extent that not 3 or 4. What is that? It's like 5 decades. Sorry, 5 or 6 decades. The stuff that's being put out there now is like far and away better than the original founding members of the American Bladesmithing Society, just specifically. And there's other, Knife Makers Guild and different things like this. And so the custom bladesmithing and knife making climate that we are in today is much different, I would say, than 50 years ago. And 50 years ago, for example, you had guys like Ruana and who was the other guy that predated? What was his name? Skagel, yeah, Bill Skagel. Like his stuff, I would say Bill Skagel's stuff was nicer than Ruana's, but Ruana had a signature style that looked, let's be frank, it looked shoddy, but people loved it, and I'm like, I think like, could he get away with that now today? I don't know, maybe. Like, and that's the thing about this whole thing is like, so much of this has to do with the guy who's making it. Like some guys like Ruana, he could do his thing and he made stuff, and frankly the fit and finish and it just looked shoddy. was the steel and the performance up to par? As far as I know, but he that was his thing. That's how he did it, and people loved it. And that's all there is to say about it. Bill Skagel, his stuff was tighter, for sure, better in fit and finish. But like his blade designs and stuff, I feel like were undeveloped. Like the way he put together his put the guards, like the way he forged his guards, and not really a ricasso basically, but the way he forged the tangs is what I mean. The way he forged his tangs and installed his guards and everything like that, it was kind of like undeveloped like that, but that was his style. Like he started making knives and then didn't kind of progress into like a defined ricasso form or anything like that, if you look at his knives. But that was his style. That's how he built them, and people loved him. And if he didn't build them that way, they wouldn't be a Skagel, And people that do these like what's the word? Not reproduction, like a tribute knife. That's what I'm trying to say. And they build them the same exact way as the originals, and that was his style. So that's still true today. So while the bladesmithing climate definitely has changed over the last half a century, it still boils down a lot to who's making the knife, and the name behind it. And you can go crazy on like fit and finish and just detail and everything like that. And this is just the truth. Like you can make the same knife quality wise, fit and finish wise, as a known maker, and your knife could be everything that knife is, but he's going to be able to sell his for 10 times what you could sell yours for, just because he spent the last 20, 30 years building a name and a brand. And that's what it's about. That's what it comes down to. So yeah, that's what Duck Rabbit just said there. So Mule Power, whatever you're thinking, it's much worse. Well, then I guess it should be. Ouch. I need to hydrate better. Sorry. Got a cramp. Kick the camera and everything. You should be able to shine easily then. Yeah, that does sound pretty bad. Scales coming off for sale. Do it yourself. DIY scale installation. Yep, Jason Knight's a good example of what I was talking about. Well, guys, we can rabbit trail all night on different bladesmithing type stuff, but I'm going to go drink some more water and go 9-8. So I appreciate y'all hanging out and the questions, and we'll have to do a live stream before next year so Duck Rabbit can use his free super chats. So I'll try to keep that in mind. And we'll do it again sooner than later. So appreciate it, Ratfink. Thanks, Duck Rabbit, Mule Power, everybody. Appreciate it. Take care, and we'll see you on the next one. I gotta figure out how to turn this off.